Okay. Good. I see everybody's closing their PC. That's very good reaction. Thank you for not surfing online while in class. So we have 3 more classes, regular classes, and then on 18th. So that is the Tuesday, 18th. I have put in a extra class, okay, for Hoko, and it will be at 4:30 here in this classroom. So we'll get met in this same class on Tuesday, the 18th. The classes should send you a notification so you know. Okay? And as I said, it really depends on how many people come. It's not a mandatory class. If a lot of people come, I'll do a simple lecture on recent developments on the Constitution and press freedom in Japan. It's kind of an interesting topic. If not so many people come, I won't do a lecture. Instead, I will help you with your final paper if you need help individually. I received some drafts from some people already. Thank you. I will get it back to you as soon as I can. Maybe today or tomorrow. So please send in a draft if you're worried about your grade or if you're worried about whether you're doing it right before the 17th. Just email me directly. All right? Good. So last week we talked about what did we talk about? Anybody remember? Decentralization and the relationship between central government, local government, cities, and rural areas, and whether it's been good for the rural communities or bad for rural communities, post-war experience. I think it's a mixed experience, but as we see, it's very difficult in a lot of areas outside of Tokyo and the big cities. So that's one very important conflict. Cleavage, I can call it social cleavage, so division between certain groups. So people living geographically in separate places. Today we will talk of another kind of division, and this is a division between young people and old people, and the effect of shoshikoreka, so low fertility and high aging or rapid aging. And as you know, as you should know, Japan is famous for having a very, very low birth rate and very, very rapid aging. It's one of the leading countries in the world in terms of koreka, so population getting older and actually the population shrinking. Last year, Japan shrank by 270,000 people. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but 270,000 people is how many? 10 Kyoto universities. All the students of Kyoto University is about 25,000 students. So that's 10 times. Poof, disappears. So if you have that every year and it accelerates, it's quite a big deal. A lot of towns and cities are much smaller than that. So it's a shrinking population. And the question is, it's shrinking, and at the same time, you have this division between the younger generation and the older generation over priorities about what to do with society, where to spend money, how to develop the country, obviously. You know what? It doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict, and it shouldn't be a conflict. I mean, we're all in the boat together, so ideally, old people and young people should cooperate, but tensions exist. And I want to talk a little bit about this gap between young people and old people. And I think this is quite an important thing, not just for society in general, but if you're young yourself. Because the future of the country, in 30, 40, 50 years, is going to depend on how we create a good balance between the priorities of taking care of old people, but also investing in young people and making sure that it's sustainable. Okay, so that's the theme, so I hope that's exciting for you. Try not to be too pessimistic. I'm usually very pessimistic, but it's good to look at the world in a very pessimistic way and then to be unexpectedly rewarded by good things. So if you have a very pessimistic view and then something good happens, then you are sort of happy. As opposed to if you go with a very optimistic view and then something bad happens, then you get disappointed. So pessimism is rewarded by occasional good things that happen in the world. For example, this weekend's election results, perhaps, for some people. Okay, so I'll talk about these overall demographic challenges. What does demography mean? I used the word a number of times. Some of you may have remembered. Very good, the gentleman there. That's the one. Check that people are not serving the web. Good, not serving the web. They're taking notes.
Yeah, people.
Number like people. Okay, that's good.
Like, I don't know, like population,
Good.
age,
Yeah.
population pyramid.
Good. All those words are connected. What does demos mean?
People.
People, very good. So democracy is the rule of people. Aristocracy is the rule of aristos. Aristos are wealthy. So demos is people. Graphy, what's graphy?
Picture.
Huh?
Picture.
Picture, yes. Or study as well. Or picture, I guess. Actually, in this case, it's a picture. So very good. So it's a picture of people. It's actually the study of populations and how they are consistent of their age groups and their size and how it changes. So Jinkou Doutai. Okay, so we'll look at overall overview of the demographic situation and how that's affecting, in general, society and government policy. Okay, and then we'll talk in more detail about this tension that possibly is emerging as a result of this demographic change between young people and old people. And in the end, we'll talk a little bit about how things could be improved or the young people's situation could be more reflected in government policy, and that's politics. Right? Politics is the one and major way in which groups of people's interests are protected or reflected in government policy in a democratic state, which Japan is. So we'll talk about how young people are participating or not participating, and why it's so difficult to get young people involved in politics in general. Okay, just some very basic data. Hyper-aging in Japan. Japan is the fastest aging country in the world. Here's the black line is Japan. These are other countries, OECD countries. China is also aging. This is from 1950s to 30s projection, and you can see the proportion of people who are over 65 years old. That's the definition of aged population. So you can see it starts around 5% in 1950. Only 5% of the population was over 65 in 1950. It keeps on going up, and around 2000, it's already at 20%. Now I think it's about 25%. 26, 27% of the population is over 65 in Japan. And it's estimated to hit 40% by 2040, calculated based on current demographic indicators or population indicators. Okay. And you can see other countries too. Many countries are aging quite quickly. India is quite young population still. China is actually rapidly aging. USA, Korea, rapidly aging. Italy, France, Sweden too. So it's not just Japan. Low birth rates and aging population is not just Japan, but Japan is the leading major economy, large country that has experience in this. So Japan is a pioneer in a bad sense or good sense. Everybody is paying very close attention to Japan and what's happening to its population, what kind of policies the government is taking, because it's a kind of example to learn from, right? Same with the nuclear accident. Everybody's paying close attention to Japan because very few countries have experienced such major nuclear accidents. How does the country deal with it? So it's a kind of, not Hanmen Kyoshi, but kind of test case. From 1983 to 2013, the population of overage more than doubled. Population over 65 more than doubled. That's really quite dramatic. By 2060, population should shrink by 31%, as current projections go. to 87 million. So it's considerable. Nearly 40% of the population will be over 65, and there will be a 40% decline in the working age population, which is, I think, defined from 15 to 64. Maybe it's 20 to 64. So those who work and who pay taxes is going to shrink considerably by 40%. So it's a very, very big change. It's hard to understand because they're big numbers. Anybody know the population of Japan right after the war? 1945? It was about 75 million. How about in 1900? It's about 30 million. So one could argue that it's more natural that Japan's population is smaller. That is, it's become too big, so maybe it's returning to a more stable historical base. Edo period, I think, is 25 million to 30 million people. Anyhow, as we know Japan and how Japan's economy works and politics works, it was based on this kind of size. So if it shrinks, we're going to have all kinds of issues. As I said last, well, this is 2015 or 14. 2017, about 2016, 270,000 people net population shrank. Okay? This is just to show you what kind of age groups, the composition of different age groups, 0 to 19-year-old group, 20 to 64. I guess this is the working age population, old and super old, and you see that the 26-year-old starts to shrink, especially the young people shrink. This is from 1950s, I guess 30s. And then the older population continues to expand. Why? Why is this happening? Basically because there are fewer and fewer babies. Not enough babies to replace the existing population. Okay? You can calculate the average number of babies being born to women between, I think, age 15 to 44, which is considered the period during which most women give birth to children. And you get a number called the total fertility rate, which in 2010 it's gone down a little bit more. It's 1.39. And you have life expectancy in 2010, which is 80 for men and 86 for women, and the median age, average age, is 47. If you compare that to 1947, total fertility rate is 4.5. So on average, most women between 15 to 44 would give birth to 4.5 children. Life expectancy was only 50 for men, 54 for women. And median age was much younger. So obviously there's this gap. Fewer babies and people are living longer. They're much healthier until an older age. Okay? So then you have older people surviving, fewer replacements. So overall population tends to become older and older, less young people. And eventually you start shrinking. And it's already happening now. Is Japan the only country with low fertility rate? No. Obviously, a lot of countries, most countries have seen decline, especially the developed economies. US, Japan, France. Japan is this gray line. Britain, Italy. What is this? Germany. Italy and Germany have very low fertility rates, almost comparable or the same as Japan. France and the US have a bit higher. South Korea, very low. Anyhow, what's happening? Why is this happening across the world? Well, different factors. I think one of the big reasons is women are more educated, they have more opportunity to work, gender equality, so they choose to work. And it's hard to balance work and family. Also, the cost of raising children. Used to be children is an investment in the future. If you have lots of children, they help you on your farm, or they help you in your work, whatever you're doing, a carpenter, or if you're a fisherman, or whatever. And they're also insurance. They will help you when you get old and retire. Now that you have a pension scheme, universal and national pension schemes, you don't need children as much to depend on. So you have less incentive to have children. Also, it's very costly now. It's like a cost center as opposed to an investment. Then it becomes a sort of, you make a choice. You think, can I afford to raise children? They're costly, and I don't necessarily need them for future investment. So these are some reasons. I don't exhaust it. It's a very complicated process why families are shrinking. But this is the trend. What happens? Well, if you have more and more old people, you have to spend more to take care of them. For health care, nursing homes, also for pensions. These are very big. And because you're spending so much on old people, there's less to spend on young people. What is it to spend on young people? Spend on education, spend on higher education, universities, spending on, I don't know, young couples, young families. So to give support for nurseries, those kind of things that you need to spend to help young couples. That's money spent. We talked about this a lot last week. Because of aging and because populations are shrinking, you have communities that are actually disappearing. There's some villages in Japan where they close the village down because there are too few people. It's an extreme case. But there are cases where there's too few people that they have to shut down the village. Hard to imagine. This is accelerating, and you know from last week that there's some studies which estimate that almost 40% of existing communities in Japan are threatened to disappear because there are not enough young couples making children there. Eventually, by 2100 or something, they'll disappear. In these depopulated areas with few people and lots of old people who need a lot of care, it's very expensive to take care of them, right? It's very costly. Especially if they're depopulated, because there's you have to provide services in the geographically dispersed areas. So one suggestion is to get people to concentrate into certain cities, not Tokyo, but into regional cities or bigger cities, and so we don't have to have hospitals and nursing homes and fire brigades and all these public services you need, sewage systems in each village, but in a central place. So you have economies of scale. These are very big themes, so I'll go into each of them in more detail. Economy. What happens to the economy when the working population shrinks and young people, there are fewer and fewer younger people, fewer and fewer new couples, new households? Well, economy shrinks. It's not necessary that it shrinks, but the pressure is towards shrinking. Fewer consumers, right? And fewer producers. Well, how can you deal with that situation? Well, you increase productivity. Fewer workers, but each of them are double productive, then you don't need double the population. And that's what Japan really has to do. They have to make individuals more productive. And the last part, which we'll go into later on, is this tension. Kind of a conflict between younger and older generations. Right. So just some more evidence. What's happening in Social Security costs? This is 1964. This is 2008. Total amount of spending on Social Security, social welfare costs, of which this is pension. The green is pension, Nenkin, and the red is医療, so medical. And Fukushi Sonota. Fukushi Sonota, Seikatsu Hobo, so for people who are unemployed, unemployment dole, spending on creating Hokusho, Wikuen, various kinds of social security benefits. It's very, very small, this aspect. Most of it is pensions, medical care. Of course, medical care isn't just for old people. Young people need to go to hospital too. But a large proportion of it is, of course, spent on older people, which naturally need more. Yeah.
But during this time, GDP is also increasing.
This is true. I
think it would make more sense if we were looking at social spending ratio to GDP.
Very good. That's a very good point. Well, obviously, GDP is, I don't know how many times bigger from 1964 to 2015. I have those figures. They're coming up. Anyhow, bear with me. So Social Security costs is, but as a share, you can see as a share, it's very large. The costs on pensions take up a very, very large proportion, which wasn't the case earlier. There weren't so many people retiring yet. The working population was bigger. And some 70% of all Social Security payments now go to those over 65. Okay? So a lot of the Social Security is spent on old people. Here, this is the amount of money spent as a proportion of total expenditures. So this is proportion, so it's not the absolute figures. This is the figure you're looking for. But you can see that in 1975, 33% of all Social Security spending was on elderly. So it wasn't that low, as opposed to 5.6%, which was used for jiro kazoku kanke, so for children and families. What's happened in 40 years, or 35 years? It's double the amount of money spending on old people. Whereas the total amount spent on families and children has gone down to 4%. So, of course, there are fewer young people, so there's less need to spend on younger people as a proportion, but the gap is quite clear. When you calculate the ratio, if you divide the amount of money spent on older people as opposed to non-old people, elderly, non-elderly spending ratio, it's a kind of international comparative figure. Kind of useful to see how much money governments, what the priority for governments are in terms of spending on Social Security. Japan is the worst, or the highest. Ratio is very high. Then you have US, interesting, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Australia, Germany, Spain, Canada, France, New Zealand, go down the way. Denmark, Sweden, Ireland, Belgium, Finland. So Nordic countries, Norway, Australia. Is that Australia or Austria? Probably that's Austria. No, Australia. This is probably Austria. So you can see that there is, people complain about, actually people don't really complain, the media really doesn't talk about it a lot, nor do politicians really talk about it. But the reality is Japan, comparatively speaking with other countries, spends tremendous amounts of money on old people as opposed to young families. Of course, Japan is one of the most aging societies, but there are other countries that have aging societies. Germany, I guess, for example. Where else? UK tends to be an aging society in which the ratio isn't that high. So what's going on? Well, there are various political reasons, but just remember, comparatively speaking, Japan spends a lot of money on old people. Well, this is kind of not so important. Well, it is very important, but one of the reasons why Japan's debt is increasing so much is precisely this. So much money needs to be spent on pensions and elderly medical care. That's one of the main sources of debt. It used to be in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 80s, spending on public works, spending a lot of money on making bridges and dams and roads, right? We talked about this, to spread out around the wealth into the regions. That was a larger contributor to debt and spending. But since I think mid-80s, and especially in the 90s, you see public spending, pork barrel spending on public works has gone down, and spending on pension and medical care, old age care, has gone up. And that's the contributor to a lot of this debt. This is a common, and another issue is, not only is pensions expensive, it's becoming more and more difficult to sustain the current pension system. Why? Well, back in 1975, you had 8.6 workers, working age people. This here is 15 to 64. Sometimes it's 20 to 64. Supporting one retiree, right? So all these 8.6 people, they pay in taxes, income taxes, whatever taxes, Social Security benefit taxes, and that was used to pay for pensions. Okay, but now you only have maybe less. This is 2035, 3.5 or 2.5 people for one pensioner, because there's so many more old people and less workers. By 2035, there'll be 1.7 workers for one pensioner. So the burden if you're going to keep the pension level at the same generous level, or same amount as 1975, what do you have to do? Well, workers have to pay more taxes, or the government has to issue more debt. Both are very, very, very politically problematic, right? And also economically unsustainable. This kind of chart this figure you can understand by looking at the the overall demographic structure. The idea is that this is age group 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. And this is the amount of people in that cohort, age cohort. Okay? And this is men, this is women. So in 1950 there were about 83 million people. In 1945, 75 million, I think. And there are a lot of not so many old people, lots of young people. Now we have a big bump of older people, bulging in the middle, and then less younger people to support this pyramid, and finally we're going to have a very reverse kite, or reverse pyramid. Not so many young people, that's all. You see this quite often. It's a very clear kind of indication that it's heavy, top-heavy society, at least in terms of demographic structure. I love this picture. It's kind of funny. I don't know who these people are. Maybe they're models. Maybe they're people who work at this television company. But this shows kind of calculations based on average age, how long you live, and how much you pay into the pension system, national pension system, or corporate pension system. How much you will benefit or lose out in terms of lifetime paying into the pension system and getting back after you retire. If you're 70, over 70, you benefit like 30 million yen. You get, if you live to 85, whatever the average age, you're going to get 100 million plus. If you're born in 1950, so 61, you get a little 1 million, 10 million, 8 million bonus. Now once you get into the 60s, these people who are born in the 60s, they start working when they're in the 1980s, maybe in the 20s, and then they work until say 2020. Pension benefits have been cut considerably, and the amount of pension you start paying in, you have to pay in, has increased. So you lose out, and it gets worse and worse. If you're born in the 1990s, are you guys born in the 1990s? Yes? No? You guys were born in different space-time continuum? 1990s? Yes? Yes. 1990s, you were born. Are you born? Yes. I just wonder if you understand what I'm saying sometimes. Your voice is so muhyojo. It's going to be minus 2000万円 for you guys. 今の年金の支払いと after you retire, what do you expect to get? Well, they're reducing pension benefits, and they're also increasing the amount of tax you have to pay, or the pension premiums you have to pay. Okay, so the government says the pensions will last 100 years. I don't know, 10 years ago, they said, no worries. But if you calculate in the current growth of the economy and income growth, it will run out. Money will run out about 2032 to 38. So what are they going to do? Of course, they're not going to say the pension is going to be bankrupt. What they're going to say is we're going to reduce the amount of money we give you for pensions that we promised, or we're going to make you work until you're 70. Right now it's 65. It'll be increased to 67, 70. Maybe you don't get pension until you're 75. And they increase the amount of money you have to pay. Another big problem is that a lot of people are not paying pensions at all. If you don't work for a big company, organization, you're self-employed, or you work for a very small company, you can join the national pension scheme. 国民年金。保険料の納付率の推移, which means how many people are actually paying into the system. It's an obligation, you have to, but you can choose not to. They're not very strict, or they're trying to be strict. And about 65, 50, now it's gone down to 60%, under 60% of of people only are paying. So about 40% of people are not paying into the Nenkin system. These are the people who are not working for big companies. How can you have a pension system where 40% are not paying, but they're entitled to get? Because these people are entitled to get the minimum. It's bankrupt, basically. And this figure is a big problem because people see this and they think, oh, nobody else is paying, or a lot of people aren't paying. Well, I won't pay too. But it's a reality. So they have to make it much more strict. They have to make it more stricter, that you can't avoid not paying. But a lot of people don't have money. They don't have jobs, or they don't have enough. So it's a real nightmare. The basic pension payout, if you have the minimum payout, is less you can get than Seikatsuho as it's currently designed. Seikatsuho is the money you get if you have no support, if you have no employment, you have no money. That's money that is provided for those who have no income at all. You can get it if you apply and you say you're unemployed and you can't find any work. That's higher, slightly higher than the pension, minimum pension. This is also another problem. Why should I pay into a system that is going to be less than if I just go and apply for DOE, if I go apply for unemployment benefits? Okay, so that's very optimistic. What about the impact on the economy? Well, the article that I gave you, Japan's Lost Decades from a Demographic Perspective, is very, very comprehensive, very good. You should read that if you're interested in this. What happens when population starts shrinking and aging for the economic structure and for corporate, for companies operating in that system? Well, the main argument is that what worked very well for companies and governments during a time when there was a large supply of labor, new workers coming in, and markets were expanding, it doesn't work anymore, obviously. Okay? And these are employment practices, market structure employment practices like a lifetime employment, and keeping salaries of young workers low and rewarding them when you get older. So nenkojo-retsu. That worked well in the period when there was a growing working population because you join the company when you're 20, your salary is very low, but when you become 60, 50, 60, your salary increases gradually by age. And that works because you have new workers to replace you, to come in, and they'll work cheaply for you, for the older generation, the older workers. But now you don't have this inflow of new workers, and you don't have an expanding economy, you don't have an expanding market, so companies can't sustain. You should read that more detailed article if you're interested. Another problem that's identified is that because your resources of the company or governments are directed to the older workers and to the elderly retirees, there's less investment. And not just families, but R&D and education. And these things are very, very important if you want to shift the economy and keep up and be competitive in the global economy. To shift from older industries and older sectors to new value-added things. You have to keep on investing in R&D and in education. Japan's R&D spending as government and education spending by government is very low. Companies tend to have quite high, but not necessarily high. It depends. Average is not so low in terms of R&D spending, but even these big companies, they have a lot of pension requirements that they have to they have to pay retired workers. They also have to keep on paying older workers because they had a system of salaries going up as you get older. They have to hold on to them. They can't fire them, right? The Japanese system was that very difficult to fire older workers. This worked well when the economy was growing, but now it's very difficult to sustain. When you have a lot of older seniority-based wages and you have older workers retained, it's very expensive for companies. So you have it hits the competitiveness, and you often tend to have lower productivity. Those in their 30s and 40s tend to be much more productive than those in their 50s and 60s. But because it's a seniority-based wage system, older people get paid without being highly productive. Things are changing, but generally speaking, this tends to be weighing down on Japan's corporate sector. Okay, well, as the domestic market shrinks, population shrinks, consumer shrinks, Japanese companies they can't make money just by targeting Japanese consumers. Say, this is when Toyota last year made record profits globally. But most of the profits came from abroad. Their sales of cars in Japan shrank. But they made record profits. Why? Because they sell cars all over the world. What this does is Japanese companies, they focus their attention to overseas markets. Why worry about Japan? It's a shrinking market anyway. So you pull out your production, you pull out your R&D facility, R&D centers, and you move out overseas. Less jobs in Japan, less money in Japan. Companies are global. Even if it's a Japanese company, it doesn't obligate them to stay in Japan. Okay. And so these are some major trends. You can look at that article and explain in more detail and more, I should say, more carefully than I did here. When it comes to young people, this is one of the major issues of an aging society. It's the casualization of labor for the young. What is casualization? What does it mean to casualize? Does it mean you're wearing less business suits and everybody's wearing t-shirt, casual clothes? No. Yeah.
Maybe it is like part-time work.
Yes. So formal and casual work, contract labor, regular work, and irregular work. Right? So if work becomes casualized, it means that people get hired on less formal, less regular contracts, part-time contract. This is happening all over the world, but it's happening in Japan considerably because of this seniority-based wage system and the fact that companies have very difficult times, have difficulty in firing older workers that are costly. They don't have enough money to hire new young employees full-time, so they hire them contract. They don't have to pay as many benefits or salary. So, as I said, companies, and not just companies, the public sector too. The public sector, they say we have to encourage full-time work, and to reduce. They don't really say, but a lot of public sector companies, public sector institutions, even universities, they are hiring less and less full-time. Not just teachers, but the back office staff. They're hiring less and less full-time contract. They have 5 years or 2 years. And they can't do that because there are all these 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds who have full salary and they can't fire them. Your personnel budget is limited or shrinking. So what do? Well, they hire young people on lower conditions. We talked about this maybe sometime else, but there's been a very large jump in irregular work. Between 2000 and 2012, percentage of Japanese men with irregular jobs increased from 20% to 28%. I think now it's about 31%. For those who are 15 to 24, and from 9 to 18%, a bit higher now, those between 24 and 34-year-olds. So a lot of younger people, younger men, which is an important point, because Japan traditionally has men supposed to work and make money for the family, make bread for the family, are having difficulty getting full-time jobs. In part because companies and institutions have hired all these older people who they can't fire.
May I ask something?
Yes.
Isn't this kind of inconsistent with the, labor shrinking, so they need actually more workforce?
Yeah.
So even though they need more labor, they pay less.
Yeah.
And they can hire them as contract workers.
Very good point. So I guess that's the thing that this puzzles a lot of people.
Yes.
Why? The total working population is shrinking, so they should be able to, in terms of supply and demand, supply is less, so workers should be more valuable. So companies should be paying more and providing better contracts, long-term contracts. Well, it doesn't work that way. The population crunch, I think there are different factors in terms of population demand for workers. And one is, of course, automation. So in a lot of sectors, manufacturing, they've been decreasing the number of employees. So thanks to automation. So they don't need to hire as many people. The automation. Another is deregulation of labor laws. So companies in the past, they couldn't hire certain workers on contract. But because they deregulated, even in manufacturing, all kinds of job areas, for nursing or whatever, nursing homes, I don't know, IT workers, all these areas, companies can hire on short-term contracts, irregular work. So the legal environment has changed. What other reasons can you make for this? If you read the article that I suggested for you in next week, which talks about this quite a lot, it depends on the sector. A lot of the jobs that used to provide full-time contract work, manufacturing or public sector, have been lost. And instead, a lot of new jobs have been created in the service sector. And in the service sector, there has been less tradition and less regulation in terms of making sure that workers have better conditions. Weakening of labor unions, that's another factor that you have to consider.
But for that reason, can we say that like the need for labor force is not that big? Because if it was that big, probably firms would offer better deals for workers.
Well, companies don't need so many people to start. I mean, it's shrinking, but
Yes.
they don't. The absolute demand for workers, in some areas, yes. For example, like Yamato Unyu, like the truck delivery service, which has been expanding, and their conditions have been improving in some sectors, yes. But not everybody can shift to these industries that require a lot of labor. And those that require labor, I guess that the transition, the shortage of workers hasn't reached that point. Wages are coming up though, gradually and surely, in certain areas. For example, the minimum wage for working in a convenience store has come up considerably, but they haven't shifted all the way to providing full-time work.
Maybe they're adapting a bit, slowly.
Slowly, yes. And the pressure isn't, they'd rather not hire full-time. They'd rather try to do everything as possible, not to provide full-time, but find ways of getting workers. The next step, of course, will allow immigration in. Then you can really have very accessible, usable labor without providing the kind of benefits they provide full-time Japanese workers. Anyhow, irregular employment generally has very low salary, and they're not entitled to benefits. And if you join the irregular workforce, you don't develop the skills that employees want. So you get stuck in that field, which is very difficult. And Japan doesn't have a very good retraining scheme, re-education, like some countries do. Where if you get unemployed, you get a course of retraining yourself. They do have some, and job mobility has tended to be quite low. We talked about this and we'll talk about it a bit more, but the fact that there are a lot of these number of men who should be entering the workforce as full-time workers are not, they cannot get married. They have very much difficulty getting married. Why? Well, women want to have secure, men with secure jobs and relatively high salaries, and contract labor doesn't provide that. Okay, the statistics show here, the increase. This is in 1993, this is 2013, different age groups. A really large increase in those in non-regular contracts. You have to be very careful with these figures. It depends on whether you're a woman or whether you're a man, what age you are. Right? A lot of older people rejoin the workforce after they retire in 60 or 65 as non-regular workers. That situation is very different from those who are young, who are going to get their first job and they can't get their first-time job. But it depends on the service sector, it depends on the manufacturing sector, it depends on different fields. But generally speaking, the trend hasn't reversed despite, as you say, shrinking workforce. Salaries are low, so if you compare the salaries, so it's a serious issue. And this, of course, will relate to our class next week about women and the workforce, but the rising non-regular employment for both men and women and changes in social and economic expectations of women mean that, young men who should be bread earners, they can't be bread earners. So it's breaking down this notion of a bread earner model, a male bread earner model. The man is the guy who goes out, and the man is the person who has to go out and make money for the family. Woman stays home. This is totally breaking down. And in the 90s or so, because there are more and more men who couldn't go into this traditional route, what happened to that? Well, they stayed home. They did a lot of temp jobs. They, decided to latch on to their parents, and all kinds of very negative terms came up in the 90s and 2000s. Parasite shinguru, hikikomori, nito, soshokei danji, all this kind of very negative discourse, which sort of blames the individual as opposed to the social structure and economic structure. It's a very, very useful way of, avoiding the most important discussion of why so many men are not getting full-time contact or getting regular jobs. New categories for young people. Hikikomori, people who stay in, who don't go out. Fruita, people who don't get regular jobs, they stay doing temp jobs, and then they have some other hobby or some life goal. They want to become a musician, they want to travel all the mountains of the world, I don't know, some hobby. They want to become an author, I don't know. It's fine, but, and neat kind of combination, those who are not in employment, education, and training. And in 2010, there were these many people. So if you add up all youth of this age in 2010, about 22 million, about, 2-3 million people were in this category, 10%. Growing group of young, unable to enter into regular work, by family life stage, as in the past. And young people are shrinking. It's kind of surprised. This should be, a precious commodity, as you say, and should be utilized. And everybody should want them. But there are more and more of these people who don't fit in or who don't get a chance. Some of them, they make a choice. I don't want to work in corporate sector. I don't want to have a full-time job. But I don't think all of them make that choice. The choice is made for them. So you have to be very careful. You can't just say, oh, these people are just lazy or they're just slow, they want to have slow life, or they want to opt out. Some of them do, but I don't think all of them. Another very optimistic slide. This is not the reality, but this is the kind of perception that is being generated. For example, here's a famous book by a sociologist, young guy, called Happy Youth in the Land of Despair. And this is interesting because we're saying all these negative things, negative conditions, environment for young people, but when he looked at the survey data and asked young people how they feel about their lives, they're actually quite happy, optimistic, at least now, but they have concerns or they're worried about the future. Some other books, 貧困世代社会の監獄に閉じ込まれた若者たち. A recent book, Generation Poverty, Youth Trapped in the Prison of Society. This is a welfare activist who wrote about this. Tries to describe the situation of young people who can't get regular jobs, who are trapped in this cycle. Very, very critical of the life chances for young people. And he's basically pointing out that it's all these structural problems. It's not the choice of the young people to have this kind of life. Most people want to have regular jobs, they want to get married, they want to have children. But that choice is not provided because of the limits to government policy and corporate decisions. This one is very, very terrible. It's called Wakamono Dore Sedai. It's called, which is young people, age of young people as slaves. And here in the manga, you can see this old man who has a chain on the young person, and he says, you have to provide and work for us old people. Basically, you work and pay taxes so that we get our pension, right? And if we don't take care of the old people, we're all going to end up slaves. It's terrible. But, I mean, this is an extreme example, but this is the kind of tension, intergenerational tension that can be created if this continues without being fixed. Okay, I haven't actually read this book, so I don't recommend it, but just to show you. Okay, well, How about the statistics? Well, one statistic you can look in terms of the happiness level of satisfaction of a certain group of people in society is suicide rates. It's not always the right indicator, but if you look at suicide rates in Japan, who are the ones killing themselves most? Well, over 60s and those between 20 and 29. And suicide rates have actually jumped from 1990, especially for these groups. Well, actually, 1997, they've gone up. What's causing this? Not so easy to answer, but obviously there is a kind of sense of despair among quite a lot of people. Unfortunately, it's a very sad kind of statistic. And comparatively, compared to other countries, suicide rate of young people is very high, which is very, very unfortunate, and this should not be the case. It's very complex. I mean, it can't be just economic opportunities. Okay, so finally, to become more proactive and not be too pessimistic, what can we do? How can you change the situation? Let me just check the time. Okay. So what can be done? Well, we gotta change the situation to politics. Try to make it so that companies hire more regular workers and provide more investment, education, and re-education for young people so that they can achieve what they want, whatnot. But the unfortunate thing is voting rates and voting and participation and interest in politics among young people in Japan is quite high. The voting rate, that is how many people vote at any given election, this is for the national elections, Shugin Senkyo, from 1970s to 2010. This is the different age groups. The red is the youngest people. The purple is the old people, 70s. This is 50s, 40s, 60s, and 30s. You can see that the younger voters, they are far lower in terms of voting turnout for the national elections. It was always lower, but it has become precipitously lower, much lower. So, voters in their 60s, they are very aggressive voters. In 2009, 84% of 60-year-olds voted. How many people voted on the age of 20s? Only 50%. Okay. Look, in this election, only 36% of those in their 20s voted. So this has fallen sharply. Voting rate of turnout of 20s to 30s at 35 to 50%. Those over 60 voting at 75 to 80%. Another reality that you have to consider is how many young voters there are out there. As the population becomes more aged, the total number of young voters shrinks naturally. How much? Well, shares of voters in their 20s used to be 20% of all the voters of all ages, 20%. But it has shrunk to 13% today. How about those over 60? In the last 30 years, it's doubled. So of all voters who are over 60 form 44%. That's pretty big. They are almost the majority of their own. And youth are a minority in terms of voters. And if you combine that with the fact that old people tend to vote and young people don't tend to vote, young people are a real minority. Their impact on national elections, maybe 5%, 6%, 7% of all votes cast. Okay? Whereas the older people, they may form 50, 60% of all votes cast. Politicians pay attention to who? Those who vote. If you don't vote, they don't care about you. Right? So half the Japanese young voters, they don't vote, so Japanese politicians ignore young people. Even if they all voted, they're still a minority, but because only half vote, why bother? This gap between the voting turnout of old people and young people is an international It's not just Japan. Young people just don't vote. They tend not to vote. Sorry, this is not in English. This is the gap between the voting rate of those between 16 and 35, so it's a bit expanded notion of youth, and those over 55. I don't know why they might have used these categories because it makes Japan not number one but number two. In terms of the gap, Japan is among the highest in terms of young people not voting compared to old people. You have South Korea, Russia, Finland, Switzerland, Israel, what other countries? Portugal, Ireland, France, US, Canada, Norway, Spain, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, Germany, which is almost the same young people vote. Holland, almost the same. Brazil, more young people vote than old people. Australia, voting turnout is higher for young people. Belgium and Italy. So these four countries are very interesting to look at. Brazil, Australia, Belgium, and Italy. Young voters go to vote more than old voters. Italy especially, I would not have thought that. Why? Well, you can do your PhD thesis on that if you want. Okay, so what is going on? Even before we explain what is going on, what other disadvantages do young people have in terms of influencing politics? They don't vote, they're limited in number, politicians ignore them. Japan, the electoral system is very complicated, depending on the upper house and lower house. But generally speaking, the electoral system is designed so that rural areas have more weight. There are more representatives from rural areas. Where do all the old people live? In the cities or in the countryside? They tend to be in the countryside. Of course, big cities are becoming older and older too. Because the rural areas are more represented, there are more politicians coming from rural areas, proportionally speaking. Older people have more influence on the political process. Electoral campaigning rules. Until recently, internet campaigning was not allowed. You couldn't Twitter or Facebook. Even today, it's quite regulated. Young people like Facebook. Young people use Twitter. Young people use the internet all the time. Those over 70, 65, not much. So electoral campaigning rules makes it disadvantage for young people to attract their interest. Until the latest election, the latest national election, voting age, the minimum voting age was 20 in Japan. They lowered it to 18. The minimum age to stand as a candidate is 25 for the lower house and 30 for the upper house. Yes? Wait, I can't hear you. Why did they lower the voting age? Good. Very good question. Yes. They lowered it recently. When was it? The last Now I have the same question too. Because usually, you're right, younger people tend to be anti-establishment or they vote for new party or for those who are LGBT, see, and acts basically policies that they for older people. Well, I think the reason is that there's so few that are back you know, and actually the young voters have been supporting the LGBT more than the opposition, especially since Koizumi and Andrew Abe. Majority of young people are pro-LGBT. Why is it more important? I think partly it's because the employment, although I said there's all these problems with category, employment is improving for young people. Have to get full-time work. So there's a sense that actually the situation is improving for young people. There's also a kind of rightward shift, kind of nationalism among young people, to some people. And those Sakura-chan and all the local out there has influenced young people to some degree. But it's kind of complex. This is also another topic you can write for your PhD dissertation or your master's dissertation. Why did they lower the age? Consider Scotland. the Scotland referendum, what was the minimum voting age for the Scottish referendum of whether Scotland should stay in the United Kingdom or not? Who knows?
16.
16.
I'm guessing.
Huh?
I was just guessing. But
16.
yeah, must be.
Very low. So if they did that, lower that age for the EU referendum, whether the United Kingdom should stay in the EU or not, it was 18. But if it was 16, they definitely would have been stay in the EU. So actually, there's an impact, and it's something that I don't know. Politicians should probably. Politicians are not completely rational, or political decisions aren't always strategic, rational, in their best interest all the time. This is a fiction that political scientists want to make you to think, a lot of them. The environment out there is very messy and you don't have all the information, you can't calculate everything. So, anyhow, another reason why young people may not be interested is that there are very few young politicians. On average, there's some that are shown on TV all the time, like Koizumi Shinjiro and whatnot, but essentially, the average age is very high. There are very few young people in important posts. Another reason why young people might not be so interested is because civics education about democracy, education about importance of political participation in Japanese public schools is bad, poor, compared to other countries. You're not really taught why it's important. You're taught in an abstract way, but you don't really get to understand why is politics so important. Because there's a lot of control from Ministry of Education saying you have to make classrooms neutral, politically neutral. You can't favor one party over another. Teachers become scared, so they try and make classes as abstract as possible. They don't really do the kind of things that are done in other countries, like mock election. You do a fake pretend election using real parties and real actual candidates. That's done in a lot of countries, US, Sweden, I've heard of them. But not in Japan, because of this notion that it has to be politically neutral. Frankly, there's no such thing as politically neutral in the world. There is no political neutrality. You're always taking a position. You just have to be conscious of the position, you have to explain it. Very difficult, or almost impossible to be neutral. Same as history. There's no such thing as a freestanding fact. It's always an interpretation. Okay, anyhow, all these reasons, politicians target older voters. And older voters, there's a lot of data suggesting that their interests are in actually protecting pension, old age care, reducing the cost of medical care for themselves. It's sad, but there's statistics showing. But then an interesting point is that actually young people are not totally apathetic towards politics. If you ask in surveys, young people say, yeah, we are interested in politics. We're curious. Although I don't get that sense when I'm teaching in this class. But generally speaking, it's actually going up. So the number of people who are interested in politics has actually gone up in recent years. And probably is higher now in 2017. Okay? But, so this is an international comparison. Are you interested in politics? Very interested, kind of interested, not interested, not very interested, not interested, don't know. Japan, Korea, US, UK, Germany, France, Sweden. In Japan, about 50% say, I'm very interested. Or I am interested. And 42% say, I'm not interested. In the Korea, it's 60% to 34%. In US, it's 60% to 35%. UK, In Sweden, which is supposed to be a heaven of political participation and social democracy, which is not the case, young people are actually less interested in politics than in Japan, which is kind of interesting. But this is the neck. When you ask Japanese young people or young people in other countries, do you think my participation may be the catalyst, may be the reason for some change in some social phenomena that I want changed? In other words, do you think that your participation will make a difference? Does it matter? Japan's young people disagree. most people think that, most young Japanese think it doesn't make a difference. I don't agree. Whereas in other countries, Germany, US, Sweden actually quite low too. Germany, UK, US, young people believe that if I participate in voting, demonstration, contacting my politician, becoming a politician, I can change society. But in Japan, the akirame doa is higher. Japanese tend to akirame quickly, but it's a serious problem. Japanese people, young people, this percentage has to go up, otherwise nothing will change. Why? Well, of course, because they're a minority, because there are few politicians that seem to represent them, politics is so complicated, the media doesn't speak to them, there isn't enough information, all these things. But it is, I think, one of the most serious problems. As this generation gets older, what happens? So I get, what's so great about democracy? Well, that's a whole class in itself. But look at South Korea, North Korea. Which country do you want to be in? It's the same peninsula, same geography, natural resources about the same, but 75 years of democracy and 75 years of autocracy. Look at the outcome. So I think we need to teach in high schools, show a lot of statistics, data about South Korea and North Korea. Which do you want to be in? Okay, that's about extreme. But anyhow, this is similar data. 社会現象が変えられるかもしれない。社会の問題に関与したいです。I want to get involved in social problems or issues. This is also for young people. Japan is very low in terms of wanting to participate in social issues, social problems. Germany, very high sense of civic participation. America, Korea, UK, a bit low and high. And have you actually participated? When you ask young Japanese, have you actually participated in, for example, demonstration? This is one way of measuring levels of participation. A peaceful demonstration. Japan, so you ask, I will never participate in a peaceful demonstration. 50% of Japanese young people answer, no, I will never participate in a peaceful demonstration. This is 2014, by the way. This is after the nuclear accident. I might participate. About 27%. これまだ参加したことがある。I have participated in a peaceful demonstration. Less than 1%. 19% of Swedes, 55% of Swedes, 22% of Swedes. Same questions. And of course, whenever you have an international survey, the answer that always tends to be very high among Japanese participants is わからない。It's the 安全牌。わからないと答えれば何も気がないだろうという。本当にまずいと思う、そういう態度は。Anyhow, わからない。It's always high. まあそういう教育なんだろうね。だからそれで、anyhow, so this is another kind of indicator. Maybe the わからない people actually want to participate or have participated, but it's seen as dangerous. You don't want to be shown as political. It's a kind of dangerous thing. So the sense of civic participation and democratic, peaceful protest is part of democracy. It's not just voting. Even though our prime minister says, to those who, Akihabara who was shouting at him, those people should not be shouting at me. This is not North Korea. You're allowed to shout at the politician. It's fine. If you're a citizen. Anyhow, so these are some statistics. How about these young protesters, or the Shiruzu and all these young people who are active, or those people in Akihabara or the network? Are they representative? Are they really the majority of young people? I'm not sure. They have 400 core members that are supposed to be active. Now it's disbanded. This is the group that was doing lots of protests towards constitutional reforms, state secrecy laws, 2 years ago? 3 years ago? They had a lot of media attention, but I'm not quite sure they are representative. And I think they're not the average students. There are some new kind of developments that are encouraging ways to get people interested through the internet. My friend who set up this website called nihonsage.com, where you can go and you can find which party you should vote for or which party is closest to your attitude. So before every election, they set it up so you can go and you answer about 20 questions, and then they say your attitude, your thinking is closest to LDP or closest to JCP or whatever. Okay? And neutral. Explains to you issues. It's quite a good site. And another positive development is that they lowered the voting age from 20 to 18. So this increases the votes, 2% increase in the size of the voting age population. If teenage voters vote, however, 18, 19, at the same rate as 20-something voters, their impact, however, will be very limited. Okay? So 30% of 2% is 0.6%. It's not a big deal. But when you look at party support, which is part of the answer, in 2014, I think this is 2016. Which party do you support? Those aged 18 and 19. No affiliation, so わからない or 答えない And then LDP is 20%, and then all the smaller parties. So LDP is always the biggest group that young people support, or at least in this survey, and then the next one. I have another statistic. Sorry. But in a lot of elections, not just national elections, you see that the LDP is higher support than the national average among young voters. Well, what kind of things can we do to improve youth participation? You should have youth organizations of parties, which is very important. European parties, you can join when you're 16 or 18, and you become part of the party. You become active, and they have, advisory roles to the party. Parties can have quotas, saying of the 100 candidates we stand, 20% of them will be between the age of 20 and 30. Like half of them will be women, and 20-30% will be young. You can do that. The party has to make their own rules. You can lower the voting age. We already did that. You can lower the candidacy age. The candidacy age still is 25. You can do mock elections in school. That is, you can use actual national or local elections, and then you do a simulation of an election, and you teach young people, this is what an election is. These are the issues. These are real parties. But it's not allowed, or there's pressure not to allow that from Monkasho. I think it's a problem. More internet use, social media should be liberalized so they can do more. You can get young people engaged through these vehicles. Proportional representation, maybe, and compulsory voting, which will be the ultimate solution. All voters have to vote. Belgium, Australia, Brazil, they have compulsory voting, so voter rate is as low as 99%, 97%, 90%. Good in Japan. Some more radical suggestions. You can do average longevity-based voting, which is heikin yome tohyo seido. What it means is you base the value of your vote depending on how many years you have to live, your average age, the average longevity. So if you're 20, you have 60 years to live. So your value of your vote should be heavier than those who are 75 and they only have on average 5 years to live. Why? Well, you're going to live another 60 years, so all the policies that the government is going to do is going to affect you much more, much longer than if you're 75. You'll be in heaven by the time the policies start having an impact, perhaps. This is a crazy idea. This is some economists thought of it. Interesting, but not practical. Constitutionally not acceptable. One person, one vote. There's another one which is a more international idea, demeni voting, which means that if you have a child, each child counts as 0.5 vote. So if you have 2 children, you have 1 extra vote. And the parents can use that vote until the children become 18. what this does is it strengthens the weight of families with small children. So policy will become geared towards families with children. Why? Well, what's the justification? Well, children are going to be the next citizens of your country, so you have to provide policies that respect children and that, favor the children. I think this is a very good idea. There are probably a lot of difficulties in implementation. Because if you think, children are also citizens, and they want to be future citizens, so they cannot be totally ignored. Yes?
The average non-English will only be kind of fair because the young people eventually have lesser votes.
Yes, it's kind of fair. I think it's fair, but it's probably impossible to implement. I can give you, you can search on it on Google on what the arguments are for and against it. When I tell this to young people, they're like, yeah. Well, I think so, it's true, because in the long run, it balances out, right? But the Constitution says each person, each one votes, so I don't know. Okay, we came to the end. How much time do we have? Oh, 14 minutes. So I hope this was a more interesting class for you than last week, I don't know. These are issues that are very pressing and very important, and some statistics show rather interesting trends, I think. Okay, do you have any questions? I'm all open for any kind of complaints or questions. Yes? Huh? Highly undemocratic to have the limited vote? Proxy vote. Well, no, the children don't vote, the parents vote. So you're right. If you have a family in which the parents and the children's political positions diverge, the parent is a Tea Party or Trump supporter, and the child is a Democrat, it's going to be a low tension. But maybe it's a good thing. The parents and children will have to talk about politics, and there'll be an opportunity to deepen family relations. Maybe it should be until age 15 or 16. Yes. No, it's a complete. There's no country that does it. In the theory, it would be. I think in the theory, the parents would do whatever. I mean, it is interesting. Of course, there are all these issues, but the children have no right or voice over what controls them and what will control them in the future. So they have the longest time on Earth left among us. And they're the ones that are going to suffer the most if we continue on the global warming, screw the Kyoto Protocol and Kyoto Treaty and all these things. I don't know. I think in principle, democratic is strength. And in democracy, who is a member of democracy has always been contested, right? In Greece, slaves and women were not members. They're not, democratic members. Until 100 years ago, if you didn't own property, if you didn't pay taxes, you're not a democratic member of society. So why not? Maybe children will be included, and you have to start including them. What's the difference between 18, 16, and 20? Tell me what's the difference between 18, 20, 20, 18, 16? No difference, right? I mean, if you're going to say, oh, you're more mature and more intelligent and you know about the world when you're 20, as opposed to being 18 or 16, I can show you some old people who are very immature and very ignorant. I can show you a 14-year-old who's very clever and very, very mature. So I don't know. I mean, of course, you can say on average, but so democracy is bendable in many ways. It's how society defines priorities. Okay, any other question? Okay, so don't say wakaranai all the time. Make a decision. Stand up for your position. Of course, sometimes wakaranai. Okay. So do your reading, okay, and then everybody has the rest of the term readings, yeah, the links to the articles. Don't just ignore it. Take a look.
Are they supposed to be all, some of them kind of have, like, not accessible for...
Yeah, you have to be a subscriber. Those are, you don't have to subscribe. You can go to this website. The library has a database of electronic journals and newspapers, the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times or Foreign Affairs. You can get the articles through the LexisNexis Academic, which I gave you the link to. Okay? You have to make some effort to find the articles. Nowadays, everything is dropped on your lap. Actually, going to the library. Have anybody gone to the library for this class? Yeah, they have, huh? No. Anyhow. And then, there's probably going to be a quiz soon. So I will send you the notes for these special lectures today or tomorrow. So start reading them. And then do your final paper. Okay? And if you have any questions, you can email. So have a nice week.